Today we are showcasing 5 of the best tanks that people know about, but they don't necessarily know just how good they are. And hopefully today, after this video, you'll know all about these tanks and how you can take them out as well as play them, and of course that you might want to be a little bit wary of them when you see them in the game. The first tank is of course not its common brother that is known as the Bobject, but this is the Object 268 without the V4. Now this tank is of course the lesser armoured version of the 268 V4, and of course doesn't get the huge weight advantage that the 268 V4 gets, but it does get a whole lot of other advantages, and one of those is that bigger 750 damage gun with really good penetration, and of course even better premium round penetration, allowing you to deal with some of the best tanks in the game from the front, not even having to aim for the traditional weak points, and in fact opening up a hole within some of the strongest armoured vehicles in places that even they will be wondering how you managed to pen. And of course the 268 also has pretty decent accuracy, considering that it is, you know, a 750 alpha damage gun. Now it isn't a medium, but it has its speed at 48 kilometers an hour base, and of course you could boost that up depending on how you want to kit out the 268 to be able to move around the map a little bit faster. And of course with the decent power to weight ratio that this tank has, I mean it's not exceptional, but it's certainly able to maintain its speed fairly well, and that allows you to maneuver yourself around the map, deal a ton of damage in those strong positions for this, and be able to come away with really high damage results. And of course it has slightly troll armor as well, in the fact that people can bounce off of you, especially if you're wiggling side to side. And yes, it does have a cupola, it does have a lower plate, and of course as soon as it angles to one side you can pen the front of the vehicle because it's angling away, and because of the pike nose that this vehicle has, you can actually pen it. But it's not necessarily as easy as that, as when it then flicks back to the other side you can end up missing and bouncing. Now I'm not saying the armor is going to be anywhere near as reliable as the 268 V4, but it certainly can pull off a couple of bounces, and you know, that's better than nothing. Next up, we then have the Centurion Action X, one of the vehicles that has been buffed recently to the point where it's become a lot more competitive, and in fact, you know, probably in terms of its greatness overtaking things like the M48A5 pattern. But they're both very fantastic vehicles when you play them in the right way, and if you see people like Killzor who's been able to absolute stomp it through with the Centurion Action X, you'll be able to understand just how powerful they can be. And there is a ton of replays where this tank has done amazing results, and although this isn't maybe the most meta kind of medium tank in the game, it is a very strong one, and that's because of the fact that you have 390 alpha damage, you have very good penetration on the standard rounds for a medium tank, you've got 0.31 dispersion base, which of course can get buffed depending on your field mods, depending on your equipment and your crew, which is very nice, and it's quite accurate. You've got 55 kilometers an hour top speed, which makes it very decent at being able to maneuver around. Power to weight ratio of 20 horsepower to ton allows you to maintain that speed, and you've also got some pretty decent ammunition types. You're able to fire APCR, you've got heat rounds, and you've got HESH rounds, although the HESH rounds aren't necessarily as good as you would see on the old version of the tier 10 British medium in the FE4202, the tier 10, not the tier 8 premium. But it's still very good. You've got that ability to deal damage with the APCR. The heat rounds are very good for those heavily armoured frontal vehicles, things like the Type 5 and that sort of stuff, and you can really rip them apart. And those HESH rounds, they don't have quite as high penetration as the FV or something like a Charioteer, those sorts of tanks line. They only have 105 pen, but I mean that is more than enough for a lot of medium tanks. If you find them in the side, things like Waffle Panzer IVs and vehicles like that, Gorillas, it's just going to be a nightmare for them to fight you, since you reload so quickly, and with that good accuracy you can just pinpoint them down, and you really want to find yourself in positions like that to have outrageous games. And in combination with that, you have good view range and you're able to spot for your team, and as a kind of generic rule, the mobility partnered with the accuracy, the view range, just makes this tank such a good overall vehicle. And if you are trying to learn how to play these lightly armoured or less armoured vehicles, then this tank is a good one to start with, since it does offer you very good turret armour for the medium playstyle, although could be penged quite easily if people know the weak points, but it does give you that initial start, and with the gun depression you have yourself a nice little 10 degrees as well. So very good at fighting on ridge lines, and that is what makes this tank in this list at number 2. There are a wide variety of heavy tanks in the game, things like the 279E that is super strong, as I'm sure we all know. We have the Chieftain, which is yet again super strong from the British line and the Soviet line as the first one, but this tank, the T110E5, is definitely a vehicle that people underestimate how good it can be at that top level. Now I'm not saying people think this is a trash tank, I'm just saying that this tank is genuinely very good, and it's all down to the gun handling that the T110E5 has, because it almost feels like you're playing a medium when it comes to its accuracy. The reload time, the DPM, 2844 DPM is very good for a heavy tank. It goes at 37 kilometers an hour base, which can of course go up to probably around 40 to 45 depending on how you're kitting out the tank, what equipment you're using, and that makes it able to really keep up to higher speeds. Now it isn't the fastest heavy in the world, and there is a reason for that, and that actually sometimes can benefit you because of the fact that when you're moving you don't get that big dispersion that you do with faster heavies, and so you can be quite accurate firing on the move in this thing. Am I saying you should be firing on the move in this thing? No, but when you do have those opportunities where the only way you're going to deal damage potentially is on the move, this is quite good at doing it. You also then have the 8 degrees of gun depression, so very flexible this tank. It does have pretty decent turret armor, albeit it does have the huge cupola which everyone can pen, and of course that is a key weak point that people will pinpoint on this vehicle, so you have to be aware of that. But you can put your gun up in the air to avoid being hit in the cupola if you can see that they're aiming at it, and also you can wiggle your turret, making it difficult for them to pinpoint that cupola even more, and you see the best players in the E5 will do that to avoid at least maybe 1 in 10 shots potentially, but it's still damage you can avoid, and of course that is always the best thing to do. The good thing about this tank yet again is, like the mediums, they have fairly decent view range, 400 meters. It's not outrageous, but it is nice to have, and of course you can spot medium tanks in the game, you can spot some of the TDs in the game as you're progressing towards them, and certainly when they're firing if you've got this tank all in that kitted out location. And of course the more you play the E5 you'll get used to the armor modeling, and you can actually use that turret armor more effectively like we've said, and you can be able to dish out a ton of damage to your opponents. Penetration is okay, 258 on a standard, and then you get a whopping 340 with premium, so those heavy tanks, things like the 279E, will be feeling a little bit butthurt when you're ending up ploughing rounds straight through the upper plate of them, which is always a nice addition to playing the E5, and it is just a generally very strong tank that I think doesn't get quite the recognition that it deserves. Is it the best heavy? By far no, but it is certainly one that we wanted to showcase in today's video. And this next one is almost in that same category of being like a heavy medium tank, and it is the 277, which I think is a very good vehicle because of the fact that it combines mobility, it combines okay armor that can be quite bouncy to some of the mediums in the game, maybe not tank destroyers, but at the end of the day a lot of heavies can be penned by those tank destroyers anyway, so sometimes you trade off your other statistics in vehicles to get better armor, which doesn't really have better armor, but you know, that's a whole different topic. This one combines both the speed, mobility, accuracy, and jumps it all into one package so that it becomes almost a hybrid between something like an IS-7 and a 907, and you get that little bit of a package. Am I saying that it's as good as the other or the others? Maybe not, but at the same time this one you don't have to actually pay for, you don't have to grind towards, which is always nice other than going through the tech tree of course. But the 277, a very solid tank, of course, having the 490 alpha as opposed to something like the E5 which has the lower alpha, and of course you have the longer reload and reduced DPM with this vehicle over the E5, but it still allows you to really corner fight and be able to use the turret armor, of which it gets better than the E5 because it doesn't have the gigantic cupola, and that makes this tank quite deadly if you can get it into a game where you feel like you can push and you can be aggressive, and it is one for the players who enjoy using that frontal armor and being aggressive, and having that mobility allows you to progress and move around being aggressive, as you like to know in World of Tanks. So hopefully that's giving you an indication as to the 277. It has that boat shaped hull, kind of. It has a weird shaped hull, to be honest. It's not your typical pike nose, but it is still your generic Soviet tank. It is like that 907 hull, and of course it doesn't technically have that super flat lower plate, which if you angle somehow you can potentially bounce around, but it's not reliable to do that. So yeah, you're best off staying hull down if possible and using the 5.5 degrees of gun depression that this tank gets to use those hull down locations and avoid being hit in the cupola, making this quite a good vehicle to use. And hopefully that's giving you an indication as to the 277, and there is one vehicle left on this list. And that final vehicle is one that we mentioned earlier, and that is the M48A5 pattern. Now, this tank has been almost superseded by the Centurion Action X in terms of its performance in the game, since they offer very similar sort of playstyles, and the M48A5 pattern has the similar sort of playstyle. It can go up to 45 kilometers an hour, so it's slower than the Action X. It's a similar sort of size in terms of the chassis, and of course the turret of the tank quite big. It does have that bulbous cupola that can be penned quite easily, of course with, you know, basically anything that you meet. And yeah, it doesn't have the best armor, but it definitely has a gun that you can't let just sit there and farm you, because 2900 DPM is quite good. It's not outrageous, but it's certainly up there with some of the big boys. And with 9 degrees of gun depression even, you're able to get on those ridge lines and use this tank quite effectively. This tank is definitely one that I think more experienced players are going to take a hold of and really get to grips with and be able to perform in these super high damage results. But it doesn't mean that the average player will not have fun in this vehicle, and it certainly feels like if you go for the tracks, if you're going for damage at the same time, you can really rack up these huge damage games. And with the DPM that you have with this, it's quite nice, and it feels really rewarding to play with. Its okay accuracy, not the best 0.35, but you know, you can't have everything, and this is a very good all-rounder tank with brilliant view range, 420 meters base, and yeah, generally a very solid tank that I think everyone will enjoy, and it is almost a staple that you should probably try out in World of Tanks at some point. So hopefully that's given you 5 tanks that you can use. If you disagree with any of them, let me know in the comment section down below, and of course if you'd add stuff in, this isn't a complete list, it's just 5 tanks that off the top of my head I thought people don't really necessarily see these all of the time, and I want to show them in their perfect element where they have these ridiculous games. So if you have any other suggestions, let me know, and I might make a part 2 to this video in the future. And if you aren't already and you've enjoyed this one and you want to see more gameplay, more reviews, more how to get better guides at World of Tanks, then let me know in the comment section down below, and I will try my best to fulfill that for you and provide as much value as I can. And yeah, if you could do anything to help me, it would just be to like the video and subscribe, and have a look at some of the other videos if you're not sure. Thank you and goodbye.